This is Seymour Rocks reporting from Down Under. Um, I came across this cartoon yesterday, and I think it just uh, illustrates perfectly kind of where we are these days, not only with the kind of takeover of artificial intelligence, but the effect of all of our devices, so that really we just have zombies or morons on the street, and they can't look up from their devices. They can't see what's happening in the sky above them or in the world around them. They just live in this virtual world. So for the 8 years and 1 month that I've been doing this blog, and I've hardly missed a day, that includes, Christmas and New Year and Easter, apart from a couple of sojourns in hospital, I've been doing this every day for that long. And part of the motivation behind it is to give just so much evidence of the things that I'm trying to tell, and mostly over the years it's been, around economic collapse, abrupt climate change, peak oil, these sort of themes. Um, that if you're given a mass of evidence from different sources, it's hardly it can hardly be denied. But of course, denial is what we're seeing in spades more and more every day. Even though, compared with when I started, when there was hardly anything, say, on climate change, from 1 week to another, now there's something every day that gives fairly very, very bad, dire news, but presents it in a way that underplays it almost without exception. And so it falls to people like myself, Guy McPherson, and others to pull things together, to join the dots. And I've always been a big picture man. I've never liked to get too bogged down in the details of one thing. I rather like to see the connections between things. And today's broadcast is not going to be an exception to that, because I'm just going to go through very, very briefly some news items which I think illustrate that what we've known for a long time. That's basically, I'm going to call it the world is going to hell in a handbasket, I think might express it quite nicely. So let's just start off. Just before I went for a walk about an hour ago, I got the first confirmation we've been ready. And of course, the Americans are already blaming the Iranians or their quote unquote proxies for the explosions in the Persian Gulf. And this is something that they didn't even report for the first 24 hours. For 24 hours I've been discussing this issue, and there was nothing, just a very small item in Al Jazeera. Apart from that, nothing. Only in the sort of pro-Iranian or pro-Russian and Russian media was there any mention of this, and not even that much on RT. It's been Sputnik that has come up with this. Anyway, so then the other big headline along those lines is from the British Daily Mail. The whole of the Western media, politicians, your Trump people, your liberals, they're all coming around this story about Iran. So this is saying sabotage in the Gulf. First pictures of damage to 4 ships, including 2 Saudi oil tankers that were attacked off the UAE coast amid fears of looming conflict between the United States and Iran. And they say Iran and America moved closer to the brink of war today after 2 Saudi tankers were mysteriously sabotaged in the Gulf of Oman. The 2 ships were among 4 commercial vessels which were targeted off the UAE coast. Well, I heard that actually that there were 9. So one of which was due to pick up oil destined for America. Amid spiraling tensions in recent days, the US had warned ships that Iran or its proxies could target maritime traffic in the region, and now suspects Iran was behind the latest attacks. US military team sent to inspect the damage believes that Iran or Iran-backed proxies used explosives to blow large holes in the ships. So far we haven't got any of this kind of insane calling for blood yet. The first sort of messages are coming out, first 24 hours, nothing happened. I actually strongly believe, there's every indication to believe so, that this was actually a false flag attack that was made to look as if it's Iran. I mean, when you think about it, Iran is, I mean, they're not crazies in Tehran. They're not going to risk bringing the wrath of the empire down on them by carrying out an action like this. Their statements have been, well, yes, if they're blocked from using their own Gulf of Gulf of Hormuz, then they will block it. Well, yeah, it's quite a reasonable sort of threat, and they've also threatened to attack Israel, which I think personally is, given the history, is reasonable as well. So I'm just going to I'm concentrating mostly on the Western media as and how that story is evolving. So I'm just going to play a short segment. This is from NBC News on this. So let's just have a quick
And
look at
Hadley,
this.
tensions really ratcheting up in the Gulf as well. Just crossing in the past hour or so, Saudi Arabia saying 2 of its vessels were attacked near the UAE with the aim of hitting oil supplies. Now, significant damage was reported in the attack on Sunday morning, but no leaks or no casualties. Let's give you a look at exactly where it was on Sunday. The UAE reported that 4 ships were, quote, sabotaged. Iran's foreign minister saying it's worrisome and demanding an investigation. What's the latest on this, and what are the implications, do you think?
Well, we've had several flashes coming from Saudi Arabia's energy ministry. He's essentially said that the international community has a joint responsibility to secure the safety of the Persian Gulf. He was essentially saying there that 2 of these 4 vessels belong to Saudi Arabia and that they did receive structural damage. He also said that these were 2 vessels that were on their way to receive some crude oil. And they were going to be delivering it to Aramco customers. So this is certainly one of the things that so many, not just who follow the oil markets, the energy markets, but also who follow global markets as well, have been really worried about, because when we remember how tight the Strait of Hormuz really is, 21 miles across at its shortest point, I mean, at its smallest point, I think it's really interesting if you take a step back here and think, okay, first of all, so many questions over whether or not all of that military hardware will actually lead to some kind of mistake or miscalculation. We heard from the Secretary of State. I asked him that specifically. He said, we're not going to miscalculate. But obviously, if you've got so many different vessels in one region, it could lead to problems. And already we're seeing a heightening of these tensions, heightening of this rhetoric. The last 24 hours with this story concerning these 4 vessels, Matt, multiple reports. We first heard from Iranian media and frankly Russian media as well, saying that these ships had been oil tankers that were set on fire. Then the UAE media came out and said, no, actually this was all about sabotage. And now we've heard from the Saudis claiming at least 2 of these vessels as their own. So this is a developing story, but I think you can kind of get a sense now of just how tense these conversations are, and the feelings in the Gulf must be pretty tense as well. Matt?
Okay, so there we are. So I shall proceed. Already we're getting the the first responses from the Americans. Trump is now warning Iran will suffer greatly if it tries anything. Tells Tehran not to make a bad mistake after US-bound Saudi tankers targeted in mysterious Persian Gulf attack. So it's not easy to say where this is going to go. I think it's all too easy to say, well, this is just going to lead to conflict, and this is going to be so the Americans can wage war against Iran. I'm sure that's partially true, but let's just hope that there are cooler heads prevail. So in the meantime, there are other things happening in the world. Nothing goes away. Venezuela, the failed coup attempt, and you've had people inside the Venezuelan embassy in Washington trying to defend the consulate, and then they've had their water, wastewater, electricity, etc. Closed off by the Americans. The American authorities, of course, are denying it. And in the meantime, this is the latest headline: caring ruler Guaido calls on the EU to impose more sanctions on Venezuela. Opposition leader Juan Guaido, who proclaimed himself the interim president of Venezuela in January 2019, earlier admitted that he considers a US military intervention to be a viable option to resolve the ongoing crisis in his country. So that is not, well, there's certainly people out there, John Bolton, etc., don't want this to go away. And in the meantime, there's a follow-on from the Sri Lanka attacks, which I found so shocking. And I warned at the time, I don't know internal Sri Lankan politics, but I could understand their reaction of caution and not want to stir up things, because they've got a large Buddhist population that are not very happy with the Muslim minority. So this is the latest headline: Sri Lanka has banned social media after Easter attacks. Sri Lanka is temporarily blocking some social media networks and messaging apps, including Facebook and WhatsApp, after attack on mosques and Muslim-owned businesses in the worst unrest since the Easter bombings. They also seem to have followed a kind of common theme in that they want to people to turn their knives in, but they're sensible enough to tell people not to hand in their kitchen knives. So I think that's one step better than Sadiq Khan in London. And back in New Zealand, we've got this disgusting piece. Patrick Gower, who's really kind of pushing this agenda of we've got white supremacists in our midst, they're in our homes, they're people we know, they're everywhere. So Patrick Gower says the issue of white supremacy in New Zealand is far larger than he thought. In my view, white supremacy in New Zealand is a phenomenon, and it's an evil phenomenon. He told Duncan Garner on the AM show it's way bigger than anyone thought. It's actually huge. Well, I'll actually go with the comments. I'm not sure if it was Martin Bradbury on the show with wait a minute, I've forgotten his moment. Anyway, I've forgotten his moment, his name for a moment, but basically saying, this is someone talking from the left, saying, that the people on the alt-right have got crazy ideas, but they're totally harmless people, and they're wasting their time going after them. Well, that would be correct, but of course the rot goes a lot deeper than that. And meanwhile, in Britain, things are really chaotic. and there's an election coming up for the European Parliament, and this is from The Guardian, of all places, saying that the Brexit Party that has just been set up a matter of a very few short weeks ago may get more election votes than the Tories and Labour combined, according to this poll. So Nigel Farage's Brexit Party is on course to secure more support at the European elections than the Tories and Labour combined, according to latest opinion poll for The Observer. In the most striking sign to date of surging support for Farage, the poll suggests that more than a third of voters will back him on the 23rd of May. It puts his party on 34% of the vote with less than a fortnight before the election takes place. The poll suggests support for the Conservatives has collapsed amidst Brexit uncertainty, with Theresa May's party on just 11%. So notice this is the European election. It's not a general election. Labour is a distant second on 21%. And anyway, and we'll forget about the Lib Dems. And one of the other results of this seems to be that UKIP seems to have been somewhat sidelined by this new party of Farage's. So I've got no opinion about that, really. And of course, this is the big news today. There's nothing in our local media at all about events in the Persian Gulf. There should be. But China is retaliating against Trump's tariffs. Now, he increased tariffs on to 25% on some goods, and then he extended it, I think yesterday or the day before, I can't remember when, to all goods. So now this is China's response. China to increase tariffs on $60 billion worth of US goods. Beijing will increase tariffs on a total of 5,140 American products from June the 1st as the trade war with the US escalates. Well, can anyone be surprised? So Zero Hedge is always concerned with what is happening on the market, and it hasn't been good. I don't follow it. I think it went down 1,000 points and it's gone down another 700 points. I'm not sure. But anyway, they say the breakdown of how China will impose tariffs on US goods, the new rates will take effect from the beginning of next month. 2,493 items to be subjected to 25% tariffs, 1,078 to 20% tariffs, 970 items subject to 10% of tariffs, and 595 will be levied at 5% of tariffs. And in further bad news, as if the poor American farmers need it, China might stop purchasing agricultural products from the US, reduce its orders for Boeing planes, and restrict service trade. Well, of all of those, I would say stopping purchasing agricultural products right at this moment when the American Midwest is still underwater and they can't even plant their crops. So here goes from Michael Snyder, whose response: economic doom. China says that there will never be a trade deal until the US agrees to their demands. So you'd have to go to this article. I haven't really looked at this yet. I'm just trying to give a broad outline here. And this is what I'm talking about. Now, this is something, if you go on CNN or CNBC or whoever, NBC, none of them are talking about this. It's all about Trump's tariffs, and of course Trump is to blame for absolutely everything, but this hangs in the background, and I think it holds a clue to the future of America. US farmers count the cost of catastrophic bomb cyclone in the Midwest, with grain stores ruined and many fields underwater. still underwater from last month's extreme weather. Producers are facing devastating losses, and I would say combined with the tariffs and what's happening to the US economy and to the environment, it's only going to get worse. And of course, last but not least, we have CO2 levels. The last time CO2 levels were this high, there were trees at the South Pole, Pliocene beach fossils in Antarctica, when CO2 was at a similar level to today's, point to the planet's future. Trees growing near the South Pole, sea levels 20 meters higher than now, and global temperatures 3 to 4 degrees warmer. That is the world scientists are uncovering as they look back in time to when the planet last had as much carbon dioxide in the atmosphere as it does today. And just put very simply, the levels of CO2, let alone other greenhouse gases like methane, have never been this high while human beings have walked on this planet. And this should be the headline of the day, that for the first time CO2 readings have reached 415.26 parts per million. And as Sam Karana points out, greenhouse gas levels this high correspond with a temperature 10 degrees Celsius or 18 degrees Fahrenheit above the 1750 levels. And that's what we need to be measuring, not what the not the more modern measurements. Oceans and ice absorb 95.5% of warming, but ocean stratification and ice loss are making the atmosphere take up more heat. And bear in mind, we get these headlines, and that sets the scene for the future. The CO2 levels will presumably go down, but that will be the new average within months, I would say. So that's it from me, really. Just a general overview of what's happening. And I'll leave some links down below. Thank you very much.